Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing flashing wings and some ways to relate it to other techniques in the American Kenpo system. So keep in mind this is not a comprehensive list and it's not family groupings. It's just different ways in which you can think about things and relate and expose different ways to relate techniques together. So let's talk through one of the major concepts in flashing wings, which is working the obscure zone. So in this case, let's talk through how we do that. So we get our block, we get our elbow, we get behind the opponent, in this case off to their right, and then we come back in front of the opponent. But do we really? If you think about it, we're still working this obscure zone, which is behind them, but what happened here was we now made them bend forward in order to keep that obscure zone. Okay? So let's talk through an opposite of that. In fact, let's talk through a double opposite of that. This would be something like a circling destruction, where not only are they switching to the left side, but instead of making them bend forward like we did flashing wings, we're now bending them backwards. Okay? So now let's change this up just a little bit more, and let's talk through it from an obscure area. Right now we've been doing everything from the front. Let's talk about doing things from the side. So we're going to combine a couple of these elements together. So this would bring in something like a backbreaker, where we're moving off to the side, in this case to the right, but instead of making them bend forward, we're making them bend backwards. Okay, so let's stick with that side and let's bring in yet another element here, or another opposite. So now we're going to go to stick attacks from the side, and that brings in something like a brushing the storm or escape from the storm. But the interesting part comes in at this point. We're making them bend forward from the right side, but now we're doing it from the low zone rather than the high zone. Okay? So that's enough of that idea. Let's move on to a new idea. Let's go from the rule of checking off loose extremities. So in this case, let's show you how it's done in flashing wings. So we're getting into here, we get behind them, do all this stuff, and we come back to the front again. Now the part to pay attention here is my left leg to their right leg, and my right hand to their right hand. So this is where that rule comes into play. We don't want them free to be used against us, so we're checking them off. And then to keep that rule in play, we're now moving it to the left, so that we can then hit them with the right. Okay? So let's talk through a different way in which we can do this. And that would be something like a flashing mace, where we do the exact same thing, but now we're taking the top route, coming across over to here. I'm going to move to a different angle than you would normally have done so you can see it. But the interesting part here is this right hand. I'm doing what's called a cover. And a cover does not work upon contact. It works upon positioning. So unlike the previous ones where we're actually making contact, which would make it a check, we now have that gap in here which makes it a positional cover. But then we're doing yet another way of doing this. We're doing what's called a burdening check. And what a burdening check does is add weight to what's going on. So in this case, we're going to do it with the right first and then finish it up with the left. Okay? So let's figure out yet another way in which we can do this. And let's go into something like the thundering hammers. So we get into here, we get the strike, and now look what's happening here. I have the right leg checked off here with my right leg, and now I have their right arm checked off, but I have it in a completely different manner. This time with the edge of the weapon rather than the hand. And I then pick it up here, again, get that strike, now switching to my left leg, and here's where it gets kind of interesting. I could either A, do it like I did in flashing wings with just the press, or B, I could grab to maintain that check before I get this final hit. Okay, so that is an option. But there are situations where you don't have an option. That would be something like an attacking mace, where we're here and we do this hit, and now we actually do that grab to control that weapon. Now the interesting part is what's happening with the leg too. Rather than doing things the way we did in the previous techniques through the side or through the back, we're now doing that kick and sliding down the front of the leg in order to pick up that check of that loose extremity. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's move on to a new concept. Let's move on to, say, something like a ratcheting. Okay, so let's change angles here so that you can see how ratcheting is done in flashing wings. So we get this hit, we get behind them, then we're going to hit them. So we hit them once and hit them twice. The important part is how we're doing this. We're going from a short range to a long range, and we're using our elbow as the pivot point in order to create the ratchet for our hand. Okay? So let's talk through a different way in which we can do this. So let's do something like a middle version, like a gathering clouds, where they're punching here, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going across and then going along the short. So now the interesting part is what happened between the two of them. In flashing wings, we are going on the diagonal. right? We're going on this diagonal. In this case, we're going directly onto the horizontal, right? But we can do combinations of that. That would bring in something like a shielding hammer, where we're now doing a horizontal followed by a vertical, or theoretically a diagonal, depending upon how you're looking at it. Okay? But then we can combine that yet a different way, and that would be something like a Desperate Falcons, where we're actually coming down here, picking up that check like we did in that previous section, but now we're going on the vertical followed by the horizontal to get them to turn. Okay? So let's talk through this yet another way. Up to now, we've been doing everything with our right hand. We could also do it with our left hand. That would bring in something like a crossing talon. We would force them to bend over. Now guess what? We're doing a horizontal, short to long, and then we're going to a vertical, short to long. Okay? So let's throw in one more. Up to now, we've done everything either off the left or the right, but it's all with the top. Let's go in from the bottom. That would bring in something like a thrusting prong, where we now do it with the leg. We're going to go up with the short and then out with that long. Okay? So now for a quick review, what did we do? We related this technique through the idea of ratcheting, through the rule of checking off loose extremities, and for using the obscure zone. Okay? Hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system just a little bit better. Thank you very much.